This is Make It Mentionable. I'm Alyssa Patmos, and this is the show about being human in a world that encourages us to be robots. I invite you to join me as we journey through the mess, the magic, and the mania in between, because what we can talk about, we can manage. This honest conversation extravaganza includes free-flowing conversations and high doses of vulnerability to remind you that you aren't alone. No topic is off limits, and episodes are designed to leave you smarter, aka more self-aware than when you came. I am so glad you're here. Welcome back to Make It Mentionable. I am here today with Ron Cecil, who is the husband of one of my favorite people on the planet. So I am so excited to chat with you, Ron. Real quick, for those of you listening or watching in, I want to let you know that you can join our podcast community by going to alyssapatmos.com/community to continue the conversation after any episode. And I would love to see you there. So, hi, Ron. Thank you so
Hello.
much for being here.
Yeah. Thanks a lot for having me. I appreciate it.
For those of you who aren't watching the show and are just tuning in, Ron is in front of an amazing color-coded bookshelf, which I am a fan of.
It's beautiful to look at, and it's not as fun to try to actually find a book once it's up there. But actually, maybe I'm going to stop saying that. I'm going to stop saying that because it actually is kind of fun because I forget the color. And then so I just have to stand there. If people don't know, like my books are in a spectrum. So it's like this weird spectrum of color. And so I regularly forget the color of the book that I'm looking for. I'm trying to remember desperately what it is. But often it's just kind of like going back to the grocery store or maybe opening the refrigerator, like even though you know what's in there and just kind of like opening it and looking. That's a bit what it's like. It's really nice. I actually changed my opinion on that. It used to be a pain in the ass. Now I love it.
Yeah, our one of our bookshelves here is color coded, but it's color coded on each individual shelf according to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is so nerdy. But my bookshelf has like the business books are at the bottom, the health books are at the top. So it moves from like physical health and safety through relationships and spirituality. And then it ends, it ends with like all of my spiritual books. And then like business books are somewhere in the second or third or fourth shelf there. So yeah, book organization, I'm a total nerd about.
I saw somebody who has a really great aesthetic. They had like this awesome like space, the living room space that we walk by when we go to a certain coffee shop in town. And they went totally opposite, and they turned all their books around so that it's only the white pages facing out. So their whole bookshelf was just the white paper, and I was like, that's kind of psychotic, and I love it.
So contrarian. I want to talk to that person. I'm like, how do you live your life? Because if you're doing that, I want to know the rest of how you live your life.
Right. I wonder if they're doing it because it like stops the like curiosity or maybe even the obligation, like, oh, I got to go read that book later. And they're just like, nope, I'm going to turn it around. And when I really need to do it, then I'll go get it.
I mean, interesting theory.
Yeah.
I feel like you got to stop it. Is it their living room or is it like a retail shop?
No, this was like their office, their like living room office. It's like, it looks like a model living room office that you would see like in Kinfolk or something. You know, it's like almost too cool to even look at. Like, you know, they have like a really cute dog bed in the window with a giant golden doodle laying there. I mean, it's just too cool across the board. And maybe that's just their thing. Maybe they just need that to be in, and that makes them feel good, which is great. It's probably a lot of self-love over there.
It's love of books, which seems to be apparent from behind you. Can you tell people tuning in just a little bit about you?
Yeah, my name is Ron, and I'm a coach. I coach men through the journey of masculinity. I call it masculine wholeness. It's not a term I came up with. I borrowed that from Richard Rohr. who is a kind of a monk in your part of the world. He's based out of Albuquerque, leading a group called the Center for Action and Contemplation. And it's a response to the way I grew up. I grew up in a culture where the person that had the most value in our culture was the pastor of our church, or a pastor, or some kind of church leader. And I was groomed to step into that world. And in a lot of ways, I wanted that because I loved the attention I got from it. I loved the feeling of having it figured out. I loved the feeling of being seen and being the person that had the answers and all that kind of things. But I also am driven by the knowing that life is not easy. It's really fucking hard. And we're all trying to figure it out. And I care for people a lot. And I think I care for people because I know what it's like to hurt. I know what it's like to not know what to do. I know what it's like to like hit the bottom over and over and be stuck. And after I went to school to be a pastor and got the education and was then a lay pastor for a bunch of years, it continued to kind of pop up where without a lot of trying, I found myself leading groups of people. And about 6 years ago, coming up on 6 years, Morgan and I really decided to like go for it and allow ourselves to be leaders again. And it's been this evolution since then. For fun, I write. I have been writing a book for the last 2 years and probably have a couple more years left in it to get it to where I want it. But it's been a real act of love of self-love to do that. And it started as a exercise of writing one true sentence a day, and has like turned into something much more. And I'm almost done with my first draft of this. And I am a dad who loves his kids, and I like to have some excitement in my life. So I've had a career in rock climbing, and archery has been my latest passion, and just all kinds of shit like that always going on.
I love it. We always have to have more than one thing. I think that makes life more interesting.
Yeah.
So one thing we were talking about before we hopped on here, because this is Make It Mentionable. So we just dive into these things. So you talked a little bit about what it's like to hurt, and you've mentioned self-love. So I can tell that weaves through as a theme in your life. And so one thing you mentioned was that your parents were married 13 times between the two of them.
Yeah.
And which is so much. I'm having a hard time comprehending that. So I want to know more about that, especially, and especially how that's influenced you, because knowing you and Morgan, you guys try to craft such an intentional marriage. And so I want to know a little bit about how your parents being married that many times has influenced you.
Gosh, it's probably the primary influence, right? Yeah. So, like I said, when we were talking, my parents, my dad was married 8 times. My mother's been married 5 times. And to their credit, 2 of those marriages for them are to each other. So they married and divorced, then married and divorced again to each other, both my parents came from pretty rough childhoods. My mother was raised by a single mom who was raised by a single mom. My dad was raised by a World War II vet who saw a lot of trauma in the war, and was also also received a lot of trauma. And my dad was harmed as a child by a stranger, and instead of being safe and comforted and healed by his parents, he was told he was a faggot and probably liked it. And he was 7 years old. And
oh my God.
and his mom simultaneously had an injury that led to a lifelong addiction to pain pills and some other things that his mom, disappeared essentially because of that. And they were affluent, West Texas, connected to the oil industry. And they weren't rich, but they were not poor. They didn't have, they didn't lack anything. So my mom met my dad at a bar in West Texas. My dad asked two other women to dance with him before he asked her. They all said no. It was her sister and her best friend. And they were married 3 days later in Mexico. And
oh my goodness, 3 days later.
Yeah. And I think this was already like my mom's third kind of major romance, and my dad's at least his third, at least. And they had a really, really like hot, burning love affair for the next several years. They were married 7 years. They were divorced the first time by the time I was 3, and then married again by the time I was 5. And it was, my memories of that and my parents in the 30s, like it was just really tumultuous, a lot of fiery stuff. And then my dad would just disappear for years at a time. And my dad, unfortunately, he died when I was 23, and he died in a very shitty state. I mean, I don't mean where he lived. I mean, he was so unhealthy. It was his third heart attack, actually. The woman that he was last married to had no idea that he'd been married so many times, completely lied to her. He was unbankable. He couldn't have a bank account because of how, what ruin he brought upon himself. And he suffered. He just suffered like crazy. And to give you like an idea of like what that looked like with his siblings, he had another sibling. He had a little sister who lost her job as a nurse because she was an addict and stealing drugs from the thing and ended up ODing. And then he had a brother who is alive still, but is such a bad alcoholic that he's had to have his esophagus removed because it's rotted from all the alcohol. And he continues to drink through a feeding tube through his nose or an enema. And he's in his 70s, right? So there's like this crazy pain in their life that they were never able to learn how to heal from. And so I know your question was like, how does that inform my life? In the early stages, I thought if I can get married and stay married, I'm going to beat it. I'm going to like be a success. Right. And I grew up in a really religious home where, marriage was kind of quantified as like the pinnacle of like existence. Like if you can have a good marriage, then you're it. And so
you're doing the Lord's work.
Yeah. I married my Christian brainwashing camp sweetheart. I met her in Manitou Springs, Colorado when we were 17, and we were, married at 21 and divorced at 25. And I thought I thought I was doomed to repeat the patterns over and over. And I think that those patterns are real, right? Like those are true things. Morgan and I had already known each other before I was divorced. We had run in the same circle of friends, and it was a very sweet friendship. We were really, there was a group of us. And in that process, so I experienced my worst fear, which was getting a divorce. And she experienced her worst fear, which was having a baby while she was not married. And that was with a, on again, off again boyfriend that she had. And I don't know if she's told you this. Did she tell you about me and my ex-wife being the first people that knew she was pregnant?
I knew that you were the first person, but I didn't know that you were married before.
Yeah. Okay. So when Morgan got pregnant, what she didn't know was that my ex-wife and I were like roommates at that point. But we were the good Christian couple in that community that people thought, oh, they must have something kind of figured out because they're married so young, and we were really good at being fake and telling everyone everything was okay when it wasn't. And we also really loved Morgan. Like we were, we're always rooting for her and pulling for her. And she came to our place when she was pregnant, and we just got to hang out with her while she was there, and it was sweet. But then I lost contact with her for almost 3 years, and it was through LinkedIn that we connected again, of all things. LinkedIn,
like unromantic social media platform. Yeah. And Morgan, that's amazing.
Yeah. But the interesting thing is like, she had just said like that she had said a prayer the day before, was like, I really want to talk to my ex-wife. Like they were friends, they were close. And she'd said a prayer that she wanted to get a hold of her. And suddenly she has an invite for me. So she emails me and she's like, oh my gosh, where's, so-and-so? I'm like, I don't know. We're divorced. I think she left me for her parents. And Morgan and I connected, and it was really sweet to see that we had gone through the worst thing that we thought, was the worst thing. I know that there are a gazillion worse things than that, but at that age and time of our life, that's what it felt like. And I think we're enthralled with each other's resilience, and genuinely cheered each other on, and have continued to cheer each other on along this thing. And when we knew that we were more than friends, and when we knew that we wanted to really like become partners and engage with, I went and asked her dad if, can I marry your daughter? And he was like, one who's really nice about it. He was super nice, but he was also really pragmatic. And he's like, Ronnie, you're divorced. You come from a family of divorced people. My daughter is a single mom. He's like, statistically speaking, you guys have a very low chance of making it.
Wow.
So what are you going to do to like, get through this? And he wasn't offering me advice, and I didn't feel any sense of judgment around it. I think he was trying to be as realistic as possible.
Yeah.
And with that realism, Morgan and I have regularly had to check in with actual reality. Like, what is our life really like? And what are the things happening inside us primarily that are stopping us from being the people that we really want to be? And along the way, in partnership, realizing, oh, her wounds trigger mine trigger hers. We're swimming in the same water. We're simultaneously trying to save each other and dunking each other's head below the water and then holding it underwater, Yes. So I could probably spend the rest of the hour talking about that dynamic, or talking about how all of the way that our parents were has completely informed the way we're trying to do life, which is evolving, right? It's like day by day, sometimes inch by inch, we're in an endless attempt to wake up to our potential and wake up to loving ourselves so well that we are brave enough to say and do and be the things that we really are capable of doing.
Right. And becoming the parents that we didn't have, and that's not to say that our parents did anything terrible. Right. Some do, but they weren't equipped with those tools. And so it's waking up, and then also like being able to truly grow up, I feel like, and show ourselves the love in the gaps that we needed, and that our parents might not have even realized was missing, because they're doing their best.
They were just trying to survive. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. So there were two things that came up for me when you were sharing these pieces of your story. And the first is that I think there comes this point in time where every kid has to realize that their parents are human. And I think a lot of times our parents try and protect us like from realizing that, which is why we end up with so much control placed over us, especially as teenagers. But then inevitably there comes a time when we're going to realize our parents are human, and sometimes that leads to a better relationship, and sometimes that leads to setting boundaries where we have to exit a relationship. And so for me, I remember like I was awakened to the fact that my parents were human when I was a sophomore in high school, I think is really where that sunk in for me.
I
And so
wish
I'm
it had been that
curious.
early for my life.
So I'm curious, when was it for
Yeah.
you? Do you have a sense of
Yeah.
when you recognize that?
Yeah, definitely. So as I was going through my divorce, or going through a divorce in my mid-20s, I realized that the path that I had been set out in front of me by my family, my mom in particular, and I don't say that with any judgment anymore, right? It was, to your point, the best she could with what she had, and in the place we were, like the options in the small town in New Mexico I grew up with is like, generally speaking, the church is where you find like people who are trying to do life together and be good, right? So um, I wrote this letter to my mom. My dad had already passed away. And the letter said, "Hey, I did everything you told me to do. I went to church a lot. I got the certificate that says I can lead a church. I have led a lot of people. And here I am repeating exactly the same thing that I was told that if
Mm,
I do, I'm going to avoid."
mm,
And not only that, I think it's, I just kind of unloaded all my judgment around it, and also the kind of closed system of our family, which was again built out of safety, a need for safety within that family, and that was like, no one gets in the family, nobody gets in. You either are born in, but if you cannot marry in. And so if husbands or wives that try to get in are never allowed in, because we all know that eventually they're going to fuck up, and eventually we're going to cast our judgment against them as a family and prove that we knew that that they were going to fuck up. And so like that was born from all the abandonment they experienced. So I had to kind of do this like hard cleaver cutoff with my mom and the whole family and church and all that stuff. It helped that I had gone through a divorce and had moved overseas. I moved to England, um, ironically, with my ex's dad, who was a venture capitalist and got me a job. It was complete nepotism, and I'm so grateful for it. Um, and it ended up opening another door with a different company there. I was able to provide for myself and be safe and have a good job for a couple of years there. But it was then, Alyssa, that I'll never forget this. It was Super Bowl Sunday. It was late at night because we were staying up to watch the game, and I stayed up, watched it, and I was riding my bicycle in this very cute little village in England called Stratford-upon-Avon, which is where Bill Shakespeare's from. And I'm riding my bike through in the dark, and it was one of those moments where it's just so I can see it perfectly. Like I can see the headlight of my bike illuminating the path. I can see my breath because it's cold outside. And I just so clearly heard my voice out loud. I might even said it out loud. I can't remember, but it was like, you need to forgive your mom. And your mom was doing the best she could with what she had. And then it flooded back to me that my mom had been raped as a child by an uncle, that she had been abandoned by her father in really dramatic ways, like over and over, that she had had multiple husbands abuse her. One of them tried to murder her. It all kind of came on me, and I was like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm judging her for this. Like, my life's fine. I'm fine. So what? I went through a divorce. And I called her up when I got home, and I apologized to her for blaming her and
mm,
not taking responsibility for myself. And then she told me, even more stuff that I've even, it's just like, oh my God, I had no idea you've gone through all that stuff. So
yeah.
I wish I had, when I was like that age that you were like, oh, my parents are human. We were at a church conference that was about like dealing with family drama or family like issues. And my mom and my stepdad and myself were so completely detached from reality that when the speaker was trying to get us to think about the ways that we're dysfunctional, we looked at each other and couldn't come up with one. And looking back on that now, I think it's hilarious because my stepdad was a closeted homosexual who was living a double life at the time. Like,
oh my goodness.
yeah, like we were all in these like little cloistered double lives. And I was living the double life of like a church kid, but also a very normal church teenager, right? Like it was, the girls and drugs and alcohol and all the just normal teenage shit. But it was like hidden because of the fear, guilt, and shame that's associated with that in church cultures.
Yeah, Christian guilt is real.
It's so real. It is so real.
So real.
40 fucking 2 years old and still like trying to clean that stuff out of me.
Yeah. Should add that just the point when I recognized my parents were human was not the same point that I forgave them. So in yours, it sounds like it came simultaneously. My journey through the forgiveness aspect of some things unfolded for years and years after. And I think we're always trying to work through and redefine our relationships with our parents as we get older. The other thing that has come up for me as you've been talking, so you talked about how we put all this pressure on marriage where like if a marriage doesn't work out, like it's failed and we're failures. And that means that like it didn't have anything good in it. And I haven't been married, but I've been in 7-year relationship and a 5-year relationship before Jeff, and both of those operated like marriage in a lot of ways. And I don't, it took me a long time, but because I felt the same sort of like Christian pinnacle of like, yes, if you stay married, like you are doing what you're supposed to do. But I don't think that's healthy. I don't think that's healthy at all. I think like relationships sometimes aren't meant to last forever. And when we choose someone, I think if we put that expectation there, it sometimes can add a crap ton of pressure. Like obviously when we choose someone and if we get married, we want it to last. But I think going into it, there's a way to have a view of it where it's not doomed from the start if it doesn't. So I'm curious if you had any evolution of thought around that.
Yeah, a lot. I think that I don't know. I mean, I'm trying to like not needing to qualify what I'm about to say. So I'm wrestling a little bit with articulating what I'm about to say. We give meaning to things that we think should have meaning. And sometimes that meaning can be too much for us to bear. And one of those meanings is if my marriage fails, then I'm not good or my life isn't good. And are you familiar with Dr. David Schnarch? He's a marriage psychiatrist. I
haven't heard his name.
He's got a great series of books. And one of the things that Dr. Schnarch talks about is differentiation, like our ability to be whole on our own, right? And that is difficult to do in a marriage where we think that we're only whole in connection with someone else. And I spent years saying that, and probably in some ways still believe that. I'm going to be honest. Like I don't think that will ever leave me because it's like it's almost like an accent, right? Like I grew up speaking whatever English I've got, and let's say I go move overseas and can speak the other language, I'm going to still have this accent. And I think it's a little bit probably like that, where it still kind of remains. What I learned going through a divorce and what I've learned going through the ups and downs of a marriage that's now 13 years in is I'm not promised tomorrow with my wife. Like, and I like, that might be because of disaster. It might be because one of us wakes up tomorrow and goes, this isn't serving me in some way. And I can't have judgment for either of those. Right. I have to go, oh, this has been a really great fucking 13 years. And she has been a wonderful addition to my life, but I don't need her in order to get what I want. In fact, the more I think I need her, the further I get away from what I really want. And that's the fun thing, is like, we're differentiated enough at this point, and this has not always been the case. Like, as we're moving towards the things that we want, like, it actually, I think, creates a lot of mutual respect for one another.
Yeah.
Where we see each other going for it. And we've had to learn how to feel safe again, and learn how to be strong on our own and differentiate. And Passionate Marriage is the name of one of David Snarch's books, Passionate Marriage. It's really great. So yeah, it has evolved. It totally has evolved. And I think one of the things that Morgan has taught me is to have curiosity around judgments I have, or what I think thoughts, or what I think should, what I think things should be. But we went through a really rough patch in 2019 that was the moment I realized, like, I had to really be okay no matter what the outcome was. And the only thing that was going to make me okay was me. That's it.
Yeah.
And it's been, I think that was probably the moment where I thought, oh, we can do this because we're choosing to do this, not because it's got to work. Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense. I love the choice piece. For me is the most magical part of a relationship. And I don't think we talk about it enough. When I was in college, my boyfriend at the time, his dad passed away, and I was very close to their family, and his mom got remarried after. And it was interesting because I think she knew at the time, like, me and her son weren't going to be together forever, even though at that point, like, we'd been together probably for 6 years, I think. And so she saw something in me that would end up more like her second husband. And she just talked to me about not knowing if you're always going to have the next day. Her first husband had passed away. And then in the second one, she talked about choice a lot. And I can't remember the exact word she said, but it's something has always stuck with me through that. And so now, like, getting to wake up every morning and having the freedom of knowing, like, I'm choosing you. I think a lot of times people bring in, like, the government legal contract of marriage for some false sense of security. They think a lot of times it's going to solve that problem. But I think underlying that, like, redefining it for ourselves, there's an element of the magic of choice. And, like, I don't know if it's a privilege. I don't know if that's the right word, but, like, there's something amazing about waking up and knowing that you're just choosing each other for that day, like, and for that moment in time. I think it's really powerful and special, and I don't think we talk about it enough.
In February, it's going to be 8 years since my last drink of alcohol. And I don't identify with the phrase alcoholic. I never have, to be honest. I've been able to, in large part, because I know that the choice of not drinking today is going to help me have a better day. And there's not many things I'm not allowing that in my life. Like, there's very little that I think about that with, right? Most of it's allowed in some level. And the other side of that is, like, I am choosing me today, number one, and then I'm choosing to be the kind of person that, as it turns out, is attractive to Morgan. And I'm going to choose today to be a better dad, as good of a dad as I can to my kids, more so be a dad to myself. Like you were mentioning earlier, I can't remember if we were recording when you talked about that or not, but and then it's not to say I choose Morgan because she's an easy choice. Like I still look at her and I'm like delighted to look at her. I'm wildly attracted to her. I just like her shit. I just like her the way she is, like just her thing. And so often I'm like, oh my God, like this doesn't feel fair that I get to have her, because I know that a lot of people would kill to have a relationship of this quality. And
but I think that happens. I think that happens too because of what you're saying, where it's not just about celebrating the unit of, we've been married for this long. It's about being able to celebrate each other and to celebrate her like as her whole person. And so it's not just like choosing the pieces that are convenient for you. It's like accepting her in all that she is and getting to do life with that person. And I think there's so much freedom in allowing someone you're with to get to explore who they are, because we run into problems when our souls feel constricted or when we feel like we can't expand into who we want to be. I don't think anybody is necessarily searching for the perfect relationship, but we fall into traps when we put too much pressure on our partner to be who we need them to be because we're not willing to be it for ourselves.
Yeah. Well said. That's really, really well said. Yeah. Yeah. It's an insane amount of pressure to put on each other that like will collapse. It's only a matter of time before it collapses.
Right. So there's a question I wanted to ask you, because I know you work with men and Morgan works with women. I have historically worked mostly with women, but I adore working with men and have started working with men more and more. And we live in a society where obviously there's male privilege, but at the same time, I think men are hurt by our patriarchal systems as well. And I think in part, we don't always allow men to feel their feelings. And I think that is some of the wounding that ends up hurting women even more. And it ends up in this weird cycle that like we have to be able to break out of together somehow.
Yeah.
And so I know that you have a group of guy friends, and I know that you work with men. And so my question is around, do you feel like we're actually teaching women to be able to hold space for men? And I ask this, I'm struggling asking this because I don't want to make it seem like it's yet another women's burden to take care of everything. But I do think we have a responsibility to our male masculine counterparts to allow them to express feelings. So the question again then is, do you feel like we're teaching our women how to adequately hold space for men to express their feelings?
That is a great question. I'm going to say no. And at the same time, I'm going to say, but that's also not their burden. And that if there is a burden to be had, it is to have as fresh of eyes as they can possibly have for the men in their life to change. Where change is possible, a person can be different, and to release the judgment and resentment and obligation that we feel towards the other. Like they will be changed when they look like whatever I think they need to look like in my mind. And I think that's really hard to do when you've been wounded by real things, right? Like if a woman's been wounded, and they are, often, we can think that the person is incapable of doing that. You hit the nail on the head about men being unable to feel their feelings. And I think that is the primary reason we, number one, are afraid to be who we truly want to be. Right. And number two leads to all of the ways that we numb out on pick your poison. Like,
Yeah.
because we know it's effective. It effectively removes us from having to face the real pain of our life. And until you allow yourself to experience the real pain of your life. And I tend to believe that doing that in front of a woman is necessary sometimes, but that the real healing happens being seen in front of other men. And the reason why is because it's so vulnerable. It's so easy to expect a lover to be a mother, like to switch over into that thing. And those two, they can I've participated in it, fucking loved it. My dad's was an addict for that situation. And it's good in the moment. It's so good in the moment. Right. And then there is not the necessary elements to grow and to heal. It's good that it happens. And I think it's completely right for a guy to be vulnerable in front of a woman. And there's all kinds of versions of this, like friendship and lasting marriages and partnerships and all, so I know it could sound a little blanketly, stated, and I'm not trying to do that. I think that the power of being seen is so necessary, and the power of saying and stating that your pain and what has happened to you and to state the kind of person that you really want to be is so necessary to feel your feelings, to move it through healing. And one of the wonderful things with that Morgan and I have consciously and unconsciously done for one another is stuck to a belief that things can begin again. Like life can begin again. And as shitty as she and I have been to each other, and we've been plenty shitty together because we've just have lived together for long enough, we're always rooting for one another. And I think we're always rooting for the best of one another. I don't know if that answered your question or not, but
it does. And it led me to another thought, because I agree that I liked what you said about it not being their burden, because ultimately I think it is, we each of us, like women have to break free of it from the systems that are placed on us. Men have to break free of it from the systems placed on them, and be able to find ourselves and to I mean the call in that sense is to allow yourself to experience who you really are. And sometimes that's freaking uncomfortable. I think sometimes what I have noticed is that women, first I'm going to rewind. The thing that you said about women switching to the mother role is really interesting too, because, that's the role where women can play the natural people pleaser and can be very nurturing. I think there's a way to hold space for a man without taking on the mother role as well, but it requires some boundaries.
Yeah.
But
well said. Yeah.
One thing that I have noticed is that I think sometimes if women carry around a lot of resentment around not being able to feel their feelings, we can be really harsh in shutting down when a man is trying to be vulnerable. And
do you think that's because they don't feel permission to also be vulnerable?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we get into some seriously shitty conflict in relationships. Because one of my favorite definitions of conflict, and I can't remember which book this is from or who said it, but it's that conflict is an unmet need poorly expressed. And when Jeff and I read that, I think he's actually the one who told me about it. When we adopted that into our relationship, it became so much easier to loosen up tension when it arises, because it's like, what's the need? What's the underlying need here?
Yeah.
It changed how we can communicate. And I think sometimes when we get so tightly wound in our own wounds and we're avoiding the work of unwinding them, then we put that hurt on other people. And we're like, who are you to get to express any of your pain when I'm sitting over here in pain and I don't know how to get it out of me?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm hesitant to say anything because it's sometimes we carry a story about ourselves that we project onto others, and
Yes.
and we think, I love what you just said, like, I don't even know how to get it out of me, and I'm resentful that you can.
Mhm.
And I'm pissed off that you have access to like some part of you that I clearly don't have in myself.
Yeah.
Honestly, Alyssa, I mean, if there's like, I have been really good at being the kind of person that can pull that out of other people really well and ignore in myself, right? Which I'm sure a lot of folks in the help industries do.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think if we could all come to a place where we all realize that it's like a birthright, a human right to feel our feelings and to be safe in feeling our feelings. And if you don't feel safe in the relationship, then that's probably a good signal to
Yeah.
find safety somewhere
Yeah.
else, right?
Agree. And I would add to that, I'm not sure that we're ever going to feel totally safe until we can do it for ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is, but there are like, the guide can't hike Mount Everest for me, but I would definitely need a guide.
Yeah.
I don't want
That's
to
right.
get
Yeah,
lost there
totally.
by
Yeah.
myself. And so there are people who can help pull it out, but ultimately like have to be willing to do it for ourselves. But I loved what you said about people in the helping professions, because I think it's so true. Like we can so often deflect feeling what we're wanting to feel and go in and just help other people. And I think that can cultivate resentment. I think people can feel it when we do that. And so I know that I've had to make a commitment. I'm like, I want to be a clear mirror all the time for my clients. And it doesn't always happen. There's things that catch me off guard, but then when it does, I have a commitment to go working on it, to go work on it, because otherwise we do get stuck in that trap where it is easy to use even helping other people as a deflection or distraction thing, just like alcohol is for some other people.
Yeah. Yeah. To 110%. Yeah.
So for what you were saying around men being witnessed by other men, women tend to do that a lot. There are different dynamics that happen in women's groups, but I have a friend who runs a men's group here in Denver, and I think there is something really powerful about men being witnessed by each other. I think the interesting piece is that I've noticed sometimes when men get in that setting, though, it's so achievement focused rather than and then like they want to give advice rather than sitting in it together. So I know you have experience, guiding men through pieces of this. So if a man was interested in tapping into this a little bit more, which I can just imagine a man driving right now listening to this and slightly rolling his eyes as I say that. But I have faith that there are spaces where this can start to open up for more and more men, because how I've experienced the benefits I've experienced of a man being willing to do that in my own relationship are magnificent. And so being able to open it up for more men, I think only leads to more intimacy, which is what so many of us are seeking.
Yeah.
So what's a good way to start? I'm trying to think of a basic question here, but what's a good way to start so that it's not just this, here, let me give you advice, I have to know the answer, I have to fix it. And hey, actually, like I can sit in these feelings with you, and like what's going on for you as a human, and like
Yeah.
how does one start to be vulnerable around their male friends?
That's a great question. That's a good question. um it's scary as hell, guys. It's really scary to tell people what you're really feeling and really experiencing and your shortcomings. It's so scary. And your nervous system is telling you you're going to die if you do it. And your nervous system has no differentiation between an actual threat, like an actual person or thing in front of you. um Example in my life, I in 2019 I speed climbed Half Dome, which is a big wall. It takes people around 3 days to climb it, and I did it in 19 hours. And the reason part of the reason I did that was I was less safe than the people who do it in 3 days. I used less gear and things like that. And there was moments where I was like, this is could be disastrous. And yet it paid off, right? There was risk. And the it's the same thing in friendship. Is like this. I think the first moment you really tell someone what you're going through is the first big step into authenticity. And that might be like admitting you're really struggling in your marriage, or with a substance addiction, or even just not knowing what you're doing in your job. like I've run into people where they just are like, I don't know why I'm here. I don't know why they hired me. At any moment, they're going to figure this out and they're going to eject me, and I'm going to get fired. And the more we can like find whatever is the thing that feels like the scariest, most tender thing, and allow someone to see us that way, it's the first step. And then there's many, many, many more steps after that. But the first is deciding that vulnerability is actually going to help you. We live in a society that the unspoken contracts are: do not be weak, do not show your weakness, show your strength and power at all times. And I think that patriarchal idea is poisonous in all regards, top to bottom, left to right, adjacent, in it, inside out, everywhere. That our impenetrable fortresses of solitude are actually going to be the things that are going to do us in. And for most men, unfortunately, and maybe most people, I don't coach women, so I don't know, and I have limited experience. There's just a few women in my life, but most men are going to fucking burn it to the ground before they decide to change. And because they can get away with it, right? They can get away with driving around on the bald tires. They can get away with putting the gas in their car that's not good enough. They can get away with eating really shitty for a long time. They can get away with putting in a lot of hours for a long time. They can get away with their secret stuff for a long time because there's not an immediate what's the word I'm looking for? There's not an immediate consequence, right? But over time, I'll use my dad as a great example. Over time, 2 packs a day from the time he was 14 to 40, and not eating healthy and not exercising and all that other stuff, led to a massive heart attack that required open heart surgery in 1990. And that, back then, it was not a nice procedure, where they would take the arteries out of your legs and, kind of poke you back together. And instead of that being a wake-up call for him, where he thought, okay, I'm going to stop smoking, I'm going to get healthy and all that stuff, he continued to do it. And it eventually killed him. And he told somebody, I know I'm dying. I know that I'm having a heart attack. This is when he was in his 50s. And I'm going to let it happen. And
Wow.
And that is where most men will have some kind of experience in there, where they know it's going down and they know the car is sideways. They know it's happening. They're not dumb. We're not dumb. We're just scared shitless. And we don't know what to do. and I think the first step is like the pushing through that fear of vulnerability and saying it out loud. Like, hey man, I'm not doing good. I'm really hurting. I'm really in a lot of pain, or I'm really afraid. And generally speaking, I think if a person can dedicate themselves to doing that in a day, and then maybe again, like within the same week, and expecting good things to begin to appear, it will. I have a podcast called Cutting for Sign, and that phrase means looking for the clues that you're after. It's an old hunter phrase when they're tracking the deer or the elk or whatever, or the footprint. It's the broken twig. Look, we need those clues in our life. Paulo Coelho calls them omens in The Alchemist, that are telling us, hey, I'm on the right path. I need to do this. Yeah.
Right. Because the cost may not be as apparent for men in the way that society is currently structured, because we're so achievement based. So as long as you keep achieving, as long as you can have the mask and you're just like performing, you can achieve, like the cost isn't as apparent, but there is a deep, deep, deep cost to your soul and to who you feel like you could actually be. And I see the reason why I started working with men is because I started to see so many parallels between the women I was working with and hearing things about men. We use different language around them, but the thing for me is that this is just so deeply human. There are differences in the how for me. There's differences in how I would approach something with a man versus how I would approach something with a woman or someone who identifies as a man or a woman.
Yeah.
There are differences in the how for me, but the what is so similar. Women try to get rid of good girl conditioning. We feel like we owe it to the world to be good. But then there are men who feel like they owe it to the world to be the nice guy. And those are very similar rooted things, but different language based on how they've grown up. And so for me, there's this bridge that I think is really important for us to learn how to be human in front of each other. Yeah. Which may sound completely idealistic, but I don't care. I think it's so important. I think it's so important for us to learn how to be human in front of each other so that we stop turning each other into freaking robots.
Yeah, perceiving the judgment as a roadblock when it could be like the expressway, right? Like where if I say this thing that I think you're going to judge me for, and it stops everything. Instead, I'm going to say it and believe that you're going to not only hear it, you're going to accept it and like provide safety in that living out loud what I am. Suddenly it becomes a superpower. Suddenly it becomes an accelerator.
Yeah. Right. And then we're on the freeway and we all get to be free in ourselves. I love that metaphor. That's so spot on. Yeah. And I think that the hardest part of that is, like oftentimes business and our relationships are our greatest mirrors. And so, a lot of times women and men now are turning towards business, and that's where we see so much of our shit come up. Yeah. But there's also our relationships, and sometimes we segment it off as like, oh, this is just how it's supposed to be. But it doesn't have to be like that. It doesn't have to be like that. And I think people having the courage to embrace vulnerability and to own the truth of who they are and let that be okay first. Like that's the important piece of individuation, because if we don't have that piece where we feel whole on our own, then it is less safe to be vulnerable. But if we can know that we're okay on our own, then we can be vulnerable in that, knowing that we can hold our own safety. Then that's where the intimacy comes in, because we're no longer just having this unconscious goal of protection. We can move towards shared connection. Yeah. And I know that that's what Jeff and I strive for. And I see it in your and Morgan's relationship as well. And it just sucks that as a society, we don't share what's behind closed doors so often. And so we don't know the similarities going on.
Yeah. To your point, I think we're probably a hell of a lot similar in every regard with everybody than we are dissimilar. And at that core is like the fear of being seen, right? Like of really telling the world like who we are. And so we we become nice guys or good girls, or we become like over producers, or some version of, or we hide completely and just disappear and want to be annihilated by whatever we're giving ourselves over to. And at its core is this fear of being seen, of being like who we really are. And then there's this also like cult of like self-personality, where it's easy to be cynical about that idea, like oh, if you just become who you are, then you're going to get everything in your life. And we see people who say that, and they might be really easy to judge and really easy to poke holes in if they're especially of like a celebrity status in that world. And then we just are stuck with like, well, fuck it, nothing's going to work because, I don't want to be like that person. I don't want to be like that guy or girl who is obviously selling snake oil or whatever our cynicism or our judgment might have. And I think the tough thing is that vulnerability part. When you're asking like, what's the first step? Gosh, I think our nervous systems, it takes so long to unwind that we often have to act as if it's true, even though our bodies and minds don't believe it's true. And that is a decision that has to be made before we even say the vulnerable thing. And it might blow up in our faces a few times, right? There's a verse, it's said several times in the New Testament by Jesus, and he says, "Don't throw your pearls before swine." And there's a lot of speculation of what that might mean, but it essentially is, don't put your valuable stuff in front of somebody who's not going to value it. And that's a tough thing, because we might want to go talk to a parent and say, "Mom, Dad, you didn't give me the things I needed." Well, fuck off, kid, grow up. They're not a safe place all the time. Sometimes they are.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not easy. It's fraught with danger. There will be blood. There will definitely be blood. and yet it's like, you have to go through the dark forest. You have to go through the brambles and all of those things in order to get through this stuff. And I think the other way is the Alyssas and Rons and Morgans and all of the millions of other people that are like us, and go, "Hey guys, we have tasted the success of vulnerability, and it's good. And there's healing and wholeness on the other side of it. And it doesn't have to look like what you think it looks like. And it doesn't have to be what you think it's going to be. In fact, I'm in a strong belief that like the universe is going to give you exactly what is right for you, if you're willing to see it and willing to receive it. And it's going to delight your heart, and it's going to feel good, even when it feels bad. And it's going to feel fun. And once my brain realized it could be fun, it did become fun. It took a long fucking time to realize that, though.
Yeah, I had the same thing. There was a switch at one point where it was like, oh, like, okay, this is a lifestyle now, and it can be joyful. And the amount of joy I experience when I choose this as a lifestyle is so much more than when I wasn't. That now, even when it's deeply freaking painful, which it is at times, there's more safety and resilience knowing that that's transitory and that's not going to last forever. And that's the gift that comes when you decide to do it over and over again, even if you've been burned sometimes, because we start to collect that new evidence, and eventually that builds up into new levels. And it takes courage, and it sucks at times, but you can start to laugh about it. So
I mean, I'm laughing now because it's all those things. Like, it's scary as fuck, and it's like painful as fuck sometimes, right? Like, it is so painful and scary, and yet we can look at one another and laugh and have this like shared experience. It's like in a way, Alyssa, like you and I have a shared intimacy that only comes from the journey that we've been on. And it's like, oh, you were in a car wreck, I was in a car wreck. Like, right? Like, you know what it's like. You know what it's like you were bullied, I was bullied, you were, whatever it is. And when we're able to not have any judgment of ourselves for experiencing it, and we're not holding anyone else's, I'm not holding judgment onto you for whatever, like, all of a sudden we can laugh about it. And suddenly you and I are, and I'm using you and I as examples for other people to realize, like, there are friendships available to you, and there are relationships available to you that are going to build you up. You and I have known each other for 1 hour, 15 minutes and 53 seconds. And we have like a shared common, like, affection for one another, and belief that life can be better for the rest of the listeners, right? Because we've been through it and we're going through it, and we know that it's not over, and we know that it's going to continue to take more work and continue to take more vulnerability. And that's why we can smile.
It is. And I love that. I think that's a good way to wrap this up, because I don't know that I have anything to add to that. I think that was beautifully said. And I think that when we commit I think it's a commitment to ourselves. When we truly commit to ourselves, different pathways open up that allow us to see who are the other people who might be committing to themselves.
Yeah.
And I think that's a beautiful thing. So for anyone listening, if you want to continue the conversation, come join us. There's a whole community of people inside the Convey Collective. You can come over to alyssapatmos.com/community. And then if you want to get more of Ron around the web, he mentioned he has a podcast. So can you say the name of that one more time and where people can find you, Ron?
Yeah. Cutting for Sign. Any podcast platform will have it. So Spotify or Apple Podcasts will have it.
Awesome.
And soon we'll have a YouTube channel. Or just search my name, Ron Cecil. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for this conversation.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. Really appreciate it.
You've just finished listening to another episode of Make It Mentionable with me, your host, Alyssa Patmos. If you're looking for more in between episodes, then sign up for The Peel. It's my free newsletter that gives tips for how to navigate whatever life dishes. And it's also the place where I share the juiciest of stories. To check it out, head on over to alyssapatmos.com/The Peel. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.